Hello and welcome to Office Hours, the podcast where we answer the business questions you're too afraid to ask. I'm Cari Street, a student and a member of staff here at King's College London. In each episode, I sit down with experts to break down complex concepts in a simple and relevant way. Today I'm joined by Professor Heejung Chung, the head of the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership and a leading expert in flexible working and employment policy, and Jo O'Connor, an international advocate for the 4-day workweek and CEO of Work Time Reduction. Together, we're tackling a big question. Should we be working less? The 4-day workweek has been making headlines all around the world as a way to improve productivity and well-being and work-life balance. But does it really work? And is it going to become the new normal? My office hour appointment is booked, so let's dive in. Heejung and Jo, thank you so much for joining me on Office Hours today. So, Jo, and head over to you first. Could you just quickly define what we actually mean when we say the 4-day work week?
So what we mean when we talk about the 4-day work week is a reduced hour work week, not a compressed work week. I think that's a really important distinction to make up front. So really this is an attempt to reduce work time for the same salary, but achieve the same goals or the same outcomes.
So how did you get involved with this sort of campaigning and advocacy?
So I was the director of campaigns with the largest public sector labour union in Ireland, and I was involved in a research project looking at working hours and work-life balance amongst our members. And one of the things that we discovered, which was really quite surprising at the time, but I guess in hindsight maybe shouldn't have been so, was that we had a large volume of working parents, mostly women, who had voluntarily reduced their hours to better accommodate other responsibilities outside of work. This is really common for people coming back from maternity leave, that they would drop down to 4 days, take a pay cut. But when we started interviewing these employees, interviewing their managers, looking at the data, what we discovered was that in almost every case, their job expectations and responsibilities were largely unchanged. So in other words, they were producing the same results. And that's what really got me fascinated with this concept of Parkinson's law, this idea that a task expands to fill the time that's available for its completion. And I think that's really at the heart of a lot of the 4-day workweek movement, this idea that it is possible to get more done in less time. But really one of the important things is it needs to be done in a structured, collective way. When this is done in a very individualized way, often what happens is, number one, you don't have any collective incentive to actually make the changes that are needed in order to accommodate this. And secondly, it leads to othering, and it leads to the people who actually pick up these individualized, flexible arrangements actually being isolated within their teams and within the workforce. So when we talk about flexibility, we believe the shorter work week is a form of structured flexibility.
That's so interesting. I've got so many questions bubbling in my head right now. I can see you smiling, nodding away there, Heejung, as Jo was talking. I'm just wondering, why are you passionate about this? And what was your initial interest in this field?
So one of the things that really got me to get interested in this is that a lot of the work that I've done around flexible working and other types of working and digitalization of work could be really beneficial for workers, but we keep seeing that it isn't. And one of the reasons for that is that we are living under this very strange work culture where long hours work is idolized, prioritized, is seen as commitment, productivity, and motivation towards work. And so there's a lot of performative work. And as Jo said, actually, you see that those who work short hours, 4-day week, or part-time work, actually, as it was defined before, was actually being much more productive. And the irony here is, if you think about the current 5-day work week, right, so 40 plus hours, right, it's actually predicated on this model of a male breadwinner who has a female caregiver and someone who does your cooking, your housework, take care of the kids and the pets, and even does your own personal care. It's like they do your laundry, they book your GP appointment, dentist appointments. So it's really untenable to consider that we could all do 40-hour work weeks and be able to have motivated careers and be able to take care of children, etc. And this is especially true, especially in the work that I've conducted around kind of division of housework, but also gender equality issues, is that we're actually asking parents to do more childcare and more enriched childcare compared to mothers in the 1970s. So what we're seeing is an increasing number of women, especially, but also fathers as well, having very high levels of burnout. And as Jo say, it's not because we're actually producing much more, that actually a lot of these working hours are really performative, only because, as I said in the beginning, it's just the way people think about it, like think about what a good worker looks like. So it's not about actual work, but it's all trying to show other people what a great worker you are.
Okay, a few questions coming off that before we go into our student questions. My first one is, there seems to be so many positives, both in terms of productivity and well-being, as you've rightly mentioned. So with all these positives, when you go into a company, Joe, and you're talking to them about implementing the 4-day work week and how that would look for their company, what are the biggest barriers that you're coming across? And I also want to know, is there a generational element to that? If you're talking to leadership levels that are maybe older and you're talking to young workers who are maybe my generation in their early 20s, what are the differences in the conversations that you have?
So there are undoubtedly operational questions, logistical questions, scheduling questions. One of the biggest myths and misconceptions is this idea that a 4-day work week for employees necessitates a 4-day work week for the business, which is obviously not the case. The business can maintain service coverage over 5 days while devising a shift or a roster pattern to enable employees to work 4 days. But I would say the biggest issue and challenge that we need to overcome is that of mindset. It's that of leadership mindsets, and even when we have leaders that are bought in, managerial mindsets underneath that are deeply embedded, that are based on these types of cultural norms that we've just been describing. And so often that is the biggest hurdle to overcome. And I think that when you're having a conversation with a leader, unfortunately, you do need to approach it slightly differently. So even if you take burnout, when we talk about burnout, we reframe burnout not as an individual wellness problem, but as a corporate productivity problem. The reality is that we have, according to most major studies, somewhere between 1 in 3 or 2 in 5 employees are experiencing burnout year on year. And if you think about the symptoms of burnout are exhaustion and fatigue, cynicism towards your work, and a lack of confidence in your performance. These are major productivity challenges, and actually we would argue that releasing and unlocking employees from those symptoms is probably the single biggest thing you can do as a leader to improve your productivity. The other side of this equation that's really important to consider is that of motivation. So we talked a bit about recovery and how important recovery is to productivity in the modern enterprise. So too is motivation. And we've built an incentive structure within many organizations, which is that if you find ways to do your job more efficiently, if you find better ways of working, new innovations, often the only reward that you get is for more work, more tasks to be loaded onto your plate. This idea of performance punishment. And so the 4-day work week is an effort to shift that incentive structure on its head and say, if you find ways to make the organization more efficient and more productive, we're going to share the benefits of that. We're going to share the spoils of your efforts with you in the form of something that is incredibly life-changing and incredibly powerful. I think there is no other benefit that any organization can offer which is so universal, but is also so personal.
And just to circle back to the generational differences as well.
Yes, I would say that there is. I think that certainly the leaders who embrace this concept probably skew younger and skew female.
I feel like no one is going to be surprised by that demographic. Are you surprised by that, Heejung?
No, absolutely not. I think younger workers are realizing, especially after the pandemic, that we cannot just devote our whole lives to work because work is becoming insecure and that we will have to find our meanings outside of work. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm such a big supporter of the 4-day week. It's that provide people with the opportunities to take part in activities that are beyond paid work, because these people are still working. It's just that it's a type of work that is not numerated in the market value. So we're talking about care work for the family, your children, your elderly parents. It could be your pets, but also for the community. People do give back in terms of benefiting society and the environment even.
I think let's move into our no silly questions section now. These are questions that we've had written in from our Instagram stories. These are questions that you might not necessarily ask in a lecture or you've never asked before, something that's really on your mind. So first question we had in: as a student that works in hospitality and wants to continue in hospitality after I graduate, is the 4-day work week a realistic option for industries with shift working patterns?
I would say yes, but it is undoubtedly more complex. I think that what we've seen, if you take a century ago, the shift to a 5-day work week was largely driven by manufacturing industry, which was the power base of the economy at the time. I think we've seen a similar dynamic with the 4-day work week, where momentum has largely been driven by knowledge work, white collar work, which again is largely the power base of the economy today if you think about technology, professional services, and so on. So I do think that actually in some cases, organizations that already operate based on shifts sometimes have an easier upfront job because they already work on a scheduled basis. Whereas if you're an organization that doesn't have a shift pattern and you're moving to a 4-day work week, maybe you need to devise one for the first time. It's undoubtedly complex. I think that often workers who work in hospitality, if we're being honest, 4-day work week probably isn't the first thing that these workers need to get resolved, because they often are struggling with low pay, they're struggling with precarious contracts. But I do think that, if you look at the old labor union adage, this is about where can we make gains and make progress in order to inch this in the right direction so that we can then build on that and try to universalize this over time. I think that's what happened with the 5-day week. It took decades for that to actually become popularized across industries and eventually enshrined in legislation.
Can I just jump on that question? I think one of the things with hospitalities or health and social care, one is about the shift work, but it's also about when it's client facing, that you need to be there with people. Is it feasible? And because there's not a lot of productivity gains for some of these work. And I think that's true. And that's one of the concerns a lot of people have. And perhaps that's also some of the things that the student might have considered, was thinking about. And I think the answer to that is that, yes, you can't. There's only so many, let's say, people are caring what you could do in terms of productivity, especially with the kind of stress of the budgetary constraints of NHS, et cetera. But what you do see is, especially in health and social care work and in retail work, one of the biggest costs that we have in those sectors is retention. So a lot of workers drop out of those labor markets and they leave and they have burnout and et cetera. And if you were to introduce 4-day week, the upfront costs might be really high, so you have to hire more workers. But you will reduce costs in terms of having to replace workers or having to buy temporary workers to replace them on a very short-term basis, which can help as well.
The next question we had was, I graduated last year. I'm in my first year in a corporate firm. I want to start talking about the 4-day work week with the company. As a junior level, how could I do this? What would be the first step to take?
So I would advise them to start by doing their research. One of the things that we're fortunate is that today there is lots more research, lots more data, lots more case studies across different industries than was the case just even 5 years ago. I think that this is not an argument that can be won on your own. So this is a conversation that I would first start having with your colleagues, starting to talk about how this might be possible, the benefits of it, how you can start to organize yourselves to be able to eventually bring this conversation to management. And when you do bring the conversation to management, I would advocate for a pragmatic approach, which is you need to think about what are the things that they care about? What are the things that they're looking to achieve? Are they looking to implement new technology transformation like AI? Are they looking to improve productivity? Are they looking to improve staff recruitment and retention? So think about what are the things that are really driving them. Build your argument based on how the shorter work week can help to solve those problems. And I think I would embrace conditionality. I would be coming to the table saying, we understand that in order for this to be sustainable, there are certain things from a measurement perspective that are going to be necessary for the organization. And to almost upfront embrace that and to come to the table with not just that, but also some ideas, some solutions. Here's some things that we could do. So coming to it from that point of view, I think will make it clear that you're serious about this. You're not just looking for a gift. You're looking for an opportunity to create something of value for both the workforce and the organization.
In terms of trade unions, is this something where, if you have a union rep in your team, is this something that you would advise going to them with and trying to get the backing of a trade union behind you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Because as Joe said, I think the most important thing is that you try not to do this as, can I work 4-day week? But it's more like, can we as a group, as an organization, work 4-day week to achieve like what you, the manager and the C-suites want to achieve while enhancing kind of workers' well-being and productivity, which is a win-win situation. And I think workers' trade unions are really good at getting that collective agreements together.
Collective action. Let's go. Okay, the next question we had is, if you earned $30,000 a year and then the job goes down to 4 days a week and stays at 30,000. But when that person leaves, what is in place to prevent an employer just putting the salary down to 4 days instead of 5?
It's a fair point. And I know that one fear that I recall employees having when we worked with organizations to do this was, is there a risk that the organization is going to do this, find the efficiency gains, and then after that's been done, use this to kind of lay people off on the back end? And so I do think that we're at this stage where most of the organizations that are doing this are early adapters. They skew progressive, they skew forward thinking, they skew innovative. They typically are buying into this idea that actually improving productivity and improving well-being isn't a zero-sum game, that these are complementary forces. But I do think as this expands into the economy, there is going to be a need for more collective bargaining protections, more legislative protections in order to guard against what you've just described. But I think that the fortunate thing is, as soon as we start to get that level of scale, then now the market value of that job in some respects has been redefined, and therefore it's not as big of a risk as it might be today, for example, where this is much more uncommon.
I mean, one of the things I do see is that there are situations where employers are kind of using it to be more competitive in the market. So you have two jobs. One job is 33,000. It's the same type of job, and it's 5-day work week. And another one is 4-day week, and it's 30,000. Which one would you choose? So this isn't unheard of. But as Joe say, I think, once we do see this more kind of prevalent, these things have to come with other policies such as strong tribunal cases, but also like, for example, pay transparencies, etc. That will help kind of employers not to abuse it and or exploit this as a way to even further exploit workers, but to actually, make sure that it works for both workers and companies.
Just very quickly to make the point that you look at these sectors where we've seen lots of organizations do this. We've seen lots of not-for-profits do this because they struggle to compete with the private sector on salary. We've seen lots of, I worked with a tech company here in Toronto who were trying to compete with Amazon, Google, Meta for engineers and product managers, and they just couldn't compete on salary. So they needed to change the game a little bit. So I do think that Heejung is right. Over time, even if you don't accompany this with a pay cut up front, in 3 years or in 4 years, if the average pay increase in your industry is 5%, you can probably get away with offering 2 or 3% if you're also offering a 4-day work week. So it comes down to this question of the time-money trade-off. And there's lots of evidence that suggests that younger workers, particularly Gen Z, are starting to have a different opinion on the time-money trade-off than maybe the generations before. A recent study by Randstad has found for the first time in 28 years, work-life balance is now ahead of pay in terms of priorities of the workforce. This is all part of this conversation.
We'll just do one final no silly question then. If I could give you both a magic wand and infinite powers to change one thing about the 4-day week, and it can be policy, it can be a misconception, it can be a cultural norm or an attitude, first thing you would do with this magic wand, what would it be?
I'll go first on that one. So I've decided my whole career is now based on trying to slay the dragon of what we consider the ideal worker norm. The ideal worker norm is that the idea that the productive worker, the committed worker, is someone who privileges work, only does work, has no other commitments outside of work, and works very long hours, and preferably in the office so that their managers can see them work all the time. So, burning their candle at both ends, that kind of worker. And that misconception is so prevalent, it is so strong, and again in certain perhaps countries, organizations more than others, and that is one of the reasons why so many of good policies may not work. I think that would solve so many issues.
I don't believe that it would be possible for many businesses if you legislated overnight for a 4-day 32-hour work week across the economy, but I do think that some form of legislation that provides for a transition to shorter hours over time would proper industry level supports in order to smooth that curve, which I think will also help with the disruption that AI is going to wreak across the economy. I think long run, like we've seen with most other technologies, AI is probably going to be more of a job creator than a job loser, but there's going to be some rough times for certain industries and certain workers in between. I think work time reduction could really help to smooth that curve.
That brings us now to our 2-minute takeaway. And this is where we just put 2 minutes on the clock And we're going to, if that's okay with you, Joe, we're going to sit back and we're going to let Heejung talk. And we ask her to just quickly give us a little summary, a wrap up of an area of her research that she thinks is really important for us to know. Okay, are you ready?
Okay, let's do it. I'm going to wrap myself through this whole thing so I could say as many words as possible.
I'm ready. I'll do the beatboxing if you want.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, so I believe we should all move to the 4-day week. So my research has been around flexible working or modern labor markets with digitalization of work. And what we find is that with flexible boundaries and digital work, that people are now moving into an always on, always working culture. And this is especially true because of this whole masculine notion of work, where long hours work is seen as some sort of a good productivity thing, commitment thing, which goes against all the evidence we know about work, which end up making people pretending to work rather than actually doing the work. So when we move to a 4-day week, we can move away from this idealization of long working hours or masculine kind of notions of working hours or work-centric cultures. And we could put more value to work outside of paid employment for caring for children, caring for family members, caring for community and the environment. And we could maybe see a more caring, compassionate, cohesive, sustainable society. And that is why I think we should all move to a 4-day week and maybe, as Joe say, nationalize it.
Boom. That was perfect. Under 2 minutes. Love it. Thank you both so much. I don't want to take any more of your time other than just to thank you for taking time out of your day to have this conversation. Our aim is to get this out to lots of students and young people. And I think this is a really important conversation to be having for graduates who are going into the world of work. And your expertise is super valuable. We will tag below to both of your LinkedIn profiles and the work that you've been doing. So if people are interested in this topic, they can learn even more about it through both of you. But yeah, thank you so much. Is there any last point that any of you want to make, or are you happy to wrap up here?
I was just going to say, love doing this with Heejung, and you're very lucky to have her at King's. I'm in Canada, and she's one of the leading researchers on these topics globally.
Oh, yeah, it's always a pleasure to work with you, Joe.
Thank you so much. Again, just to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, there's going to be more coming out. Follow us along on social media for all of those updates. We'll link to all of that below. Thank you again, and goodbye.